Thank you for being here. It's nice to see all of you. And you know, I, more or less to talk about education to begin with. And the case for making is kind of simple, or for maker education. It really is, how kids learn. What kind of experiences do you want kids to have? And they don't always, in a good way, think of that as learning, right? They do it naturally. Unfortunately, our schools aren't organized that way. It's really often teaching vocabulary, memorization, and it's testing. And so I think what we've been trying to advocate with making is really a set of rather practical skills, but also, the metacognitive skills of like creativity and innovation and change. How do you do stuff? And if I had to kind of frame it, it's not what you study, but it's what you do that really matters here. And so that's not going to take me 45 minutes to explain to you, but I'm happy to hear what you're thinking and see it. I do have this thought, which I'll show out there, but, we could all imagine better schools. Why are they so hard to create? Even really exemplary schools out there are hard to replicate. And when I think of, the point in time where we are right now with public education, we actually current parallel public education systems, charter schools, online schools, and then, butts and seats kind of schools. And, but nobody really asks how good are they for students. And so I have this theory, like, why doesn't public education change? Even though we kind of know, but it might be, if I was to ask you, maybe I will if we got time, what do you imagine it should be? We'd all have pretty good ideas about the direction it should go in. But nobody stands in front of a crowd and says, let me make the case for passive education, for kids sitting there listening to lectures, writing notes, and then being tested. Nobody says that's what education should be about, but that's what it's about. And so change that is really hard. And I was thinking of coming here and saying this, one of the reasons I think public education is so hard to change, it's part of the nature of the institution we're dealing with. And it is an institution. And it resembles in certain ways, many ways, a medieval church rather than a modern institution. Its reverence for the past exceeds any expectation for the future. Things, rites and rituals which may be obscure to us are sacrosanct, we believe in it. And I think there's kind of this, what sort of bothers me on the public side. If you think of religion in that period in particular, where, the church taught where the earth was the center, at least that's what's in the Bible. And then science emerges saying where the sun is the center of our little planets here. And, it's really the difference between kind of faith and experience. And science is really based in empiricism of testing and figuring out what to do, not just what we had in our head. Even if it sounded elegant, even if it sounded nice. And I think in some ways we have a lot of faith in the public school system. And much of that, I don't want to take that away. That's a good thing. But I also see us eroding trust in that institution because of the way that it simply doesn't work for students. So I just kind of want to say that I think what will be most valuable maybe about Maker education is what kind of experiences are we creating? Not what books are we teaching, but what does kids get to do? And how is that transformative then? So, welcome. Nice to have you. Sorry, really. No, that's all right. I'm repetitive. I think that's kind of the challenge. and I'm going to go a bit to where I think, we can change things, small ways, and the maker movement has changed things. But we don't necessarily get to that final goal. And I saw, changing education is kind of like a maker project, kind of something we got started. We may never finish it, but we are committed to it, and it drives us. So let me tell you a little bit my experience. I came up with Make Magazine about 20 years ago, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary issue at the beginning of this year. And I saw, first of all, I say, I'm not a great maker. I'm a writer, communicator, a publisher. But I saw what people were doing, and I'm really interested in that. I was curious in the how-to information about, like, how do you do some of this cool stuff, even around here. There's a fellow who has a book on how to make a vacuum former, right? So getting communities to document what they do and share with that is kind of what I came from, kind of computer manuals and that kind of stuff at O'Reilly. And so I thought of coming up with a magazine in which we actually didn't say projects were cool. We showed you how to build them and that they could be replicated. Whether you choose to or not, that's up to you. But often it kind of fills your brain with ideas about what you might do for your project, and that was the goal. And then a year later, we had our first Maker Faire in the Bay Area. It was partly driven by meeting lots of people like the ones you see here and saying they have cool things going on at home, but nobody knows what they're doing, right? And so just inviting them, kind of like science fair, art fair, craft fair, we'll give you a table and some chairs, just put your thing on there and talk about it. And I didn't know if people would care about it, but it seemed to work. Like, people were engaged and say, like, what did, there were just a bunch of questions people have, like, how do you come up with that idea? Did you try, this is the only thing you tried? What materials, where'd you get that part? And so it kind of grew out of that. We had a great run in the Bay Area, and we still do it with a break for COVID in a new location. But we also started spreading Maker Faire around the world, and one of the reasons we have it here, just kind of put it out. Here's a model for an event. Find makers largely in your community and engage them, kids and others, in hands-on activities, things that they don't get to do enough. So it's really grown out of that. We publish books, we do lots of things. But early on in Maker Faire, because it was a family, I think that was our big decision, was this is not a geek event, it's a family event. We wanted all kinds of people to come. And, a typical geek event would be all male and, of a certain age and a certain background. And this, event was just different. It had lots of people coming. And as an organizer, you never really know why people are here. Like, how did they find out? What brought them here? It's kind of like the build it and they will come kind of thing. But it's kind of fascinating to find out who's been, and, especially as you do it over years. As I think doing it now, we hear stories from people. That came when I was 12. And it really lit my mind up about what was possible, And it's those experiences that people have, And I want it to be like you go to a sporting event or a music concert and you say, well, how do I become one of those people doing that? And I called it my Monday morning problem, because we had those kids coming to Maker Faire, like you, I hope. And then, often they go back to the community, they go back to school, and like, well, how do I do those things? And schools didn't have, come on in, please join us.
I have a question.
Sure. What? You can do it. Just do whatever you want.
Do the music.
So how do we help kids realize that they could be a maker? And that word "realize" is really important, because if someone asks me what the definition of making is, it's just realizing an idea that you have, using tools and people will help you do that. And if you think about it, lots of people have great ideas that they never do anything with, that they never believe they're important, because partly they can't take that idea out of their head and share it with someone else and say, look at it. You don't have to understand what's in my head, but just look at it. And that's kind of what I really wanted to see at Maker Faire and other things is you could share that thing with someone else and they could begin to engage with you. Well, have you thought of this, or does it work that way? Yes or no? And often makers get feedback that's really important to them. And I wanted kids to get that kind of feedback. And so around 2011, we started a program called Maker Spaces, which I think kind of gave it that term. It was a DARPA grant to build Maker Spaces. Hacker Spaces was a more popular term, but I felt like, it's not going to go so well in schools. Let's come up with Maker Spaces. Fab Labs were also pre-existing. They were a really definite thing, but had a really expensive list of equipment to standardize on for good purposes. But they often were in institutions like of higher ed and more in Europe than in the US. So I really wanted Makerspace to be just a room. And it could start with stuff and maybe a few tools, but it wasn't meant to be, it didn't need to be, especially at an elementary school level, something that you had, all the latest technology in. It was getting kids engaged in the process of this. So, and I think, through the teens, if you will, we had, with a small group of people and just putting an idea out there, we had amazing uptake of teachers and sometimes parents, that said, let's create a makerspace. Often they didn't have a budget. They didn't often have permission from administrators to do it. They just started it. And it's kind of equivalent to school gardens if you know the kind of trajectory of those. Alice Waters created the Bay Area. And she, these things, like Makerspace, you really didn't get government money or state education department saying, we want to do this, we'll fund them. Instead, I remember Steve from St. Louis, first year I got a closet, my makerspace. Second year I got a room. The third year I got a budget for my room and closet. So I began to build this up, and they developed the practice of this. And I think, it certainly makes a difference. But I kind of noticed, through COVID, we had, spaces were closed often, and some never came back. Sometimes the teacher moved on. Sometimes the focus of the administration was on some other thing. And so we've had maker spaces that are gathering dust, which is too bad. But others that are doing really well. And to some degree, the idea keeps getting developed and changed. And, I don't control it. Nobody does. It's just, learn from each other, try to do it, and see what happens. But I have to say, for all, I don't mean this completely negative, but I do. STEM always had a lot of government funding, and it was very much a top-down approach. We're going to train teachers in STEM. We're going to have STEM academies. We're going to have all these things. And it's not that it hasn't had any traction, but it's just different. Maker stuff came in like through the side door instead of the front door. It was more grassroots, and people did it. But the consequence of that, sometimes those people get burned out. They have to be champions. They have to make it all happen. They don't get administrative support. Whereas, people on the STEM side would do it because there was grant funding and all these other things. So they're different. They connect easily, but often I think the problem is STEM is sort of driven by the idea we got to get kids into STEM careers, and I think that's kind of not the goal. I want to get kids to engage and learn, and then if they do, I have a high degree of confidence they'll discover those might be careers that fit their interests. We're not trying to take away their agency. And that's a big thing for, I think, what we're trying to introduce into schools. So I kind of want to mention a couple of things. So after COVID, I was kind of frustrated that maker spaces had either been marginalized since they're not being used, or that they were used for an activity. Once, bring kids in and they do a 20-minute activity and they go back to class. It wasn't changing what we were doing in school. It was just icing, to entertain kids. And so, and the other thing is, like at a high school level, it was often like an elective. Maybe you take it in your junior year, and I saw that for starting some of these programs. I was just disappointed that they didn't in some schools, they actually did change what they did throughout the school day. And so that's what I was kind of really in. So I've been working, it's taken a couple of years, but opening an alternative public high school in the community where I live that is more maker oriented. And I'm particularly interested in, I've kind of given talks on this, I call them give me your C students. Give me the students that aren't doing well at the comprehensive high school. Let's allow them to learn differently. Let's give them something different. And it's kind of a fight to really create something different in public schools. It's as though, everybody in the system has grown up in that system and they believe in that system. They don't think much outside of it, except on the edges. So it's a challenge. But it's called the Academy for Innovative Arts. And I kind of came up with the term innovative arts as a kind of a homage to industrial arts, which in post-World War II, we had large industrial arts programs. And those are 4-year programs. And, yes, there were shop classes and things like metalworking and woodworking, that kind of thing. But almost at the advent of computers, they went away. We didn't want to teach kids those things anymore. Makerspaces have kind of brought that back together in a good way, I think. And there's still real value. It's not that I'm going to turn out woodworkers or metal workers, but that hands-on experience and using a real kind of mean tool sometimes really gets your attention. And cultivating attention is one of the challenges today. So, but the idea is, like in industrial arts, I see it as a pyramid where, freshman year, they're exposed to a lot of them, and then it narrows down to finally they kind of really have an explosive preference training experience to either go in the industry or increasingly it could, go into college. So it's to give kids more exposure and experience doing things and finding out what they like to do and what they're good at. There's no guarantees of what the future is. We don't know that, but I think if they have a level of confidence in doing this, I also see innovative artists saying as, in the age of AI, creativity is really an important skill set to develop and practice. As one person wrote recently, I'm putting in Maine magazine, but way about space yet. He says, AI is BS. But it's, the creativity of figuring out what it's going to do for you, what you want it to do, what the tool should do, is still kind of the driver of value there. So I think, in this school, we'll teach AI, not for doing your essay, not for doing the standard stuff, but really using it more like you might talk to a tutor, you might talk to, in a Socratic way, having, conversation with someone about things, not to get an answer, but to engage. And so maybe the last thing is, so last week I visited a school in Issaquah, Washington, which is outside of Seattle. It's called the Gibson X School, a high school. And it was, in a model very close to what I imagined. And then just tell you a little bit about that. Because, we think we can't make change. We see examples of people that do. And it is a public school. It has about 200 students, so it's a small school. And the kids, they begin the day with an advisory session, which is sort of small group interaction. Here's how are you doing on your projects, what are you doing? And then they have about a 2-hour exploration period, which is basically time in a makerspace to do a personal project. And that is pretty much open to them. The teacher said to me, or the principal said to me, this is the most rewarding and the most challenging period for us to do. You get kids to really, build on stuff, but they get an awful lot out of it. I was struck by talking to the kids, which, not to put a label on it, but see a lot neurodivergent kind of things. But every one of them I talked to were very good at talking to me, anyone, I think to adults or generally. The young woman was kind of the parts bin, getting some stuff. I asked her what she was doing. She said, well, I'm programming a game controller with a Makey, which I kind of understood what that was, a little bored. but I'm also taking apart a commercial game controller, and I want to understand what the parts are. And I said, that's cool. And I said, when you came to this school, did you kind of think you'd be doing these kind of things? And she said, no, I just knew that I was the kind of kid that didn't fit into a traditional high school, that I was looking for something different. And then she said to me, I've grown so much since I've been here. And to reflect on that and be able to say that to really a stranger, that was pretty amazing. And so, the real thing that I think you can point out here is, how do you inspire, encourage, support growth in kids? Not just, hold them to some standard and grade them on that. They don't give grades at this high school I visited. They have capabilities that that projects and things are, kids are, sort of indication of whether they're growing and developing those capabilities. But their focus is more on depth and breadth. They're not trying to do every course that a typical high school does, trying to integrate that. So the second part of the day was called the design lab. I didn't really know what they meant by that. I sat through it, and the design lab I went to was called Feed Your Neighbor. And it was about food systems and growing food, how does food get to people, all that. But it wasn't really some abstract academic presentation. There was a little of that, but they were going to visit a food bank. They were going to visit a community garden. School had a garden. They were growing potatoes. They were, doing that kind of thing. But the teacher would engage with them, and then there was a list of projects. It was the start of the quarter, and he had identified some projects they might do, and students expanded that, and and they came up with ideas. And so their quarter is spent picking out their project to do with that theme, and it's more teacher-led than the morning is, but it's also to help them think about the process, more of them developing projects. So I took two traditional educators, a principal and a teacher, and they both said they'd never been to a school that felt like this, that the kids were so engaged. And I don't mean like they were all eager kids in a classroom. There was a campus where they were all spread out, but when you talk to kids, they were engaged. They were happy, but they weren't like reading from the same playbook. So I'm trying to replicate that and do that in our area. But I just believe kids need something different than what is being offered today. And not many people are very serious about changing that. And I don't know, when I started Makerspace, would this come from schools? Would it come from the community, like sciences, museums, places like this one? I mean, truth is, we need all of those things. All those experiences matter. They're different contexts for kids. That school I mentioned I visited, kids go to internships twice a week, so they're out of school that amount of time. And there was a young woman that was working on a sewing project, and I asked her about it, and she said, well, my internship is with the Children's Theater in town, and I'm making some costumes for them. And she said, well, this is the first time I've done it without a pattern. I'm having to figure out the geometries and stuff like that, and it's like she's really got something to do, and it ties not just to school and teaching, but for there. Lastly, before I close, this is a book. We come out with a number of books, particularly for education. But this is one of the Australian women, Steph Piper, came up with this, and it's Skill Seeker. And she came up with this idea of small skill, the kind of tiles here, which you self-describe, or her real goal was like in a makerspace or social setting, you start keeping track of the skills you have and share that with other people so that they can say, oh, you know how to do that. Could you show me? And, and this is across 3D printing, lots of different things. She kind of tries to make it somewhat game-like. And, but there's a great informality to the maker community. And I think we're trying to keep that without over-forming, like, here's a skill, here's how you acquire the skill, here's the badge you get for that skill. This is a lot more fun than that. I'll just point out a few other things. It would just give you the coverage of like what we do. This is cosplay. That's an issue we published last year. Jen Chapter is spoken here. It's on the cover. And, it's just, you see creative stuff. Like he was talking about earlier. She's a model maker for like films in Hollywood and very kind of sets. This is our current issue. Just came out, How to Train a Robot, and it's kind of AI and robotics merging together. And, it's robots with AI brains, or AI for brains. So, but the goal is kind of what can you do? And then they're not all really, just to give you an example, they're not all really high-tech projects. Let's go make a kite out of Tyvek, and so, I imagine a world where there's lots of fun things to do, that we create communities and families that want to do them. And what we kind of have to believe is it makes a difference, that they may not be getting a grade, they may not be, on some standard chart, but one of the big challenges in education is motivation. And I think your average C student the problem is motivation, not intelligence, right? And so if you can figure out ways for them to be motivated, to motivate themselves, intrinsic motivation, in other words, rather than say, we've got lots of stars or candies for you or grades, but you really like to do this and you're good at it, that helps them to begin to establish their path. And our goal is really more self-directed learning. When I look at makers, they're not being told what to do. They have an idea, and they want to realize it. They spend a lot of time on that project. And so the one sentence transformation of school is to give kids allow kids to do projects based on their own ideas and interests. And that makes a lot of difference in their motivation, in their confidence. And just like Maker Faire, don't have them do the project without sharing it and talking about it, document it, writing about it. All those are part of that thing. And, it really unifies a lot of different things that in education we care about. So that's what I had to say today. And thank you for listening. But if you have any questions or comments, I appreciate it. Any questions?
Yeah. Why do you think that the STEM funding they don't translate it to maker education? What is it about it? It seems like it's so.
Sorry.
It would dovetail so perfectly.
It's a good question. I would say that I'll give you an example. The most popular STEM program out there, called Project Lead the Way. It is a tightly scripted, top-down, curriculum. And it's sold to administration because your teachers really don't need to know anything. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And they got established during that period, they took shop teachers and made them into science teachers. And they had training, and you literally open up day one and you read from the Bible.
Right.
Right. And so the best teachers that we find out there, and that's not everyone, unfortunately, are the ones that are creative themselves and have, interest in developing that in their kids. And they can respond to the kid who says, I really like this, And that's one of the things I think is really interesting in the Gibson-Eck model is, let kids explore their own, but also expose them to lots of other stuff because they don't know about those, whether it's in the workplace or whether, in a food system, they might not think, about,
right.
Where potato is from, and you're giving them really, tangible stuff. But I went to lots of, I'll give you an example. We had a Maker Faire in New York. The next day, United Nations had a STEM conference, their big idea was to use video conferencing to beam Nobel Prize winning scientists into the classroom. And do what? Well, just talk to them about what you do, right? Talk about just being on different wavelengths, It's like, if you want me to run that program, I'd say, okay, have those scientists talk about what they did as a kid. got them interested and curious about the world. Instead, it's like, oh, I got a big grant to do all that kind of stuff. It's just, they don't know it, And I think that's a bit why, using my church analogy, the people in charge are not really that connected to what students are learning. They're managing budgets and problems and all kinds of things, and thank God they do. But, if you built it up, almost like the Reformation came along and it said, what really matters is the individual and their relationship to their God, or whatever you want to call them. I'm not a religious person. I'm just using it as an analogy because it was one of the great breakthroughs in humanity, that your experience, like reading the Bible, your experience of faith mattered more than what the church said. And I think, we're the reason that I think schools like the one I'm trying to build matter is because the answers we've been giving kids are no longer accepted by kids. Like, why do I have to take this class? It's required, is the answer. And they go, well, why is it required? It's required if you want to go to college. Well, I don't want to go to college. It's an easy out for them. If you're going to make me do something, I'll just say I don't want the thing you want me to, work toward. And we are seeing declining enrollments in college. And I think they're just questioning, do you want to go into debt, to get some more of that education you don't really like, that form of it, and graduate and then end up in Starbucks? It's not everybody, I hope, but I did a lot of work at community colleges, and I would say that the thing, we put Maker Space, had a grant, put Maker Space at college, and it really did a great job with these community colleges, especially in California, have places where a lot of kids show up. It's pretty much free, but they don't know what they want to do there, and they don't have a lot of direction. But when they start to learn from each other and begin to do stuff, they get some of that. But most of the kids that go to community college, at least in California, the stats are they drop out after 6 months because they don't attach to any kind of program or thing they want. And at Gibson Eck, I asked them about their college graduation. They said it's about the same as a traditional high school, but our kids don't just go to college; they go to programs in college. Like they know what they want to get out of it, So, and that's a huge advance for kids. It can save them a lot of money and time in getting somewhere on it. Any other questions? Thoughts? Yeah.
I don't have a question. It's more of a statement.
Yeah.
I thank you.
Sure.
Because your big magazine kept me dreaming as a kid. And it's crazy because I studied to be a network engineer, got all through that, only to quit my day job to go work for myself and just make stuff fun. Okay. And I grew up on the magazine and I got to see all these projects and it just kept me dreaming.
Yeah, man, let's bring you here. Thank you. Yeah, I mean that validates. You were talking about your life, and it was really meaningful as well.
You made it accessible, eat a fruit, made it accessible,
Yeah.
these things that,
And all the West Coast too. Maybe all in the West Coast city.
Yeah.
But out of the East Coast, all we had was a magazine. We're a big internet, right? So it's like, if they don't be happy with the interface with only in the West Coast we will.
So I guess I'm a teacher, so I teach at a makerspace over. Yeah, I have to get into the weeds now.
Good.
Yeah, I was working on a grad program for Maker Education. I dropped out because the PhD didn't work with my work schedule. So I help run a makerspace. It's an all boys private school over out west, and
West of town or west
of. Here, like the west of Miami. Yeah.
See how close you are to me.
You hit the Everglades, you went too far. You have to trim back.
Not that far.
Yeah. So some of my boys are out here in the middle of the Kleinestat, and some of them are in the tent doing that. So my big thing is motivation. So that resonated with me. So a lot of our school is, it's funny, it is a religious institution. So the analogy is there, but they are very grade motivated. The students somehow get trained into being grade motivated, and then I have to get them in the lab and beat it out of them somehow.
Yeah.
And once we get them in, and they have something that they bite down onto, it's easy, but the numbers aren't as high as I'd like them to be.
Yeah.
And have you seen other people be able to motivate within schools? Because I'm within a system trying to break a system within a system.
Yeah, no, I get that's hard.
Yeah.
I don't think I have an easy answer for that, but I do think that's kind of the, you know, the core idea there.
Part of what I was thinking is like part of the motivator is maybe getting the teachers to understand, and that's difficult too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times teachers, our space, the way it's set up is that we have two sides, and one of the sides is always open, and teachers can come in and do a maker project for
Right.
their class. A lot of the time teachers use it for what you would imagine. It's like, this is an easy project that I could just be here for, you know? And it's kind of like, how do you convince them that there's more value in this than what you're...
Incentivization, but give them an incentive.
Yeah.
But you know,
Focus people.
part of
That's the key.
say, go
Sorry, I just said that for me, and I'm the director of education here. The key is that it's like real. So is they're contributing to something beyond just making something? Like making is important, right?
Yeah.
But if they're contributing to something greater, then it becomes valuable to them because they see that their skills are useful and they're being used. And so, like for instance, we had a project where we had something we wanted to design and build, and so we made it like a Fairchild, and we gave it to school as a design brief, and those kids were working on it on their own on Saturdays in our maker space, and they created something. Now it's not complete, but that's one group of kids, and it's because it was real. Because
No, I think real. I think that's the argument I go back to in the church and the world is the world of experience is real, and world of belief is not. You know, it's important, but it's not the same thing. I think, you know, but you know, especially if you're getting kids that have been through 9 years of school. Yeah, every teacher tells me they walk in and they say,
That's what you get them.
yeah, you know, they say, you know, what do I have to do to get a good grade in a class, right? Tell me what I have to do. And like, you know, but there was an art teacher in a previous art teacher, she teaches art robotics. I go, that's really interesting, you know. He said, well, like when I got there, they wanted me to do teacher directed art. Like, you're all going to do what I want you to do. And so I think there's mixes of motivations. I think there's maturity involved too. Some kids really like helping someone else and figuring out that's a design process that they care about. They wouldn't care about the making, but they care about satisfying someone's needs. Other kids, you know, they're just very internal and they've got stuff going on and do it. So I think you have to explore everything you can. But I do feel like one of the things that STEM did not get across well enough was the creative expression angle. That, you know, why do you do art? Not to please the teacher, but to create something, you know, that you think is interesting. And to pick out on Katie's thing that she said that I thought was really fascinating, you know, and she's kind of talking about it in an art context, is how little kids particularly will just, you know, they see paper and materials and they say, what can I do with it? They're not saying, how do I make art, right? And that's a really good distinction. Is like, and that's what I've trusted in seeing in makerspaces, that kids see tools and they go, how does that work, or how do I get to use that, or things. And so there's points of engagement that are a little bit different than sit down, be quiet, and listen to what I have to say. But I'll close with this, because I think there's this really, you know, there's, coming back to the bigger analogy, there's different ways of knowing, and a lot of school is knowing that, you know, knowing what electricity is in the words that your teacher used to explain it, versus knowing how, right? And I think what's interesting is so much I say kind of putting practice ahead of theory, is they begin to ask questions that gets them to the world of theory much more in an interesting way. Just like if you were teaching kids music, you wouldn't start off with music theory. You would get them playing an instrument, practicing, and they go, well, how do I write a song, or some other things, which gets them in notation. But they're already musicians, in a way, capable of making music. And that's what our kids are capable of making. They don't know necessarily the engineering construct or any of these other terms of the formulas, but they can learn those if they're important to them. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.